Alright, so we got off track today, and there were streaks of grease coming out of the wheel, and some of it's been cleaned up already, but that led us to do an investigation in the car. We thought that maybe there was a problem with the wheel bearing, and some of the guys thought it was wheel bearing grease, but the wheel bearing is nice and snug. It doesn't spin very freely. It's got a nice amount of resistance like a wheel bearing should. It doesn't have a whole lot of wobble, but we were getting wobble in the suspension. And come to find out, it's just the bushings are getting old. So we can get back on track. The bushings need to be replaced before we race again, but it's not going to stop our day. But we did see a bunch of grease up in here. And what we found was the CV boot is old, and it's getting little fractures here, and it was slinging grease out, and it had just started. So we went and got some wheel bearing grease. I popped this off. You can't reuse these clamps unless you absolutely have to, and you get a pair of needle nose and clip it back in place. Sometimes you can make that work. That's what I had to do. We're going to safety wire our bolts for the drive shaft, or for the drive flange, and before we reinstall this. But basically, I just shot more grease in this boot, and we're going to put it back on and race it with the cracks. We can't get a new boot. I can't tear this down here at the track. We don't have another CV axle. So whenever you have a CV axle and the boot is cracked, if the CV axle is making noise, you've got to replace the CV axle. If the CV axle has a cracked boot, it's slinging grease, do not clean it out and put new grease in. Put new grease in over the old crappy grease. It sounds bizarre, it sounds stupid, but that's the rule of thumb I learned working at the auto dealership. If the CV axle is not making noise and the boot is split, reboot it. Just put new grease on top of the old grease. If you wash out that grease and put new grease in, it's going to make noise. Within a couple weeks, it's gonna go bad, and your customer's going to be upset. So for the race, the rest of the race tomorrow, we just slung more grease in here on top of the old grease and re-put the boot back on. We don't have a new boot to put back on it. So now I'm at the point of I've got to re-safety wire the bolts on this. And this is a unique problem to E36 BMWs. One time our bolts backed out. We tightened them back up, and within a couple of hours of racing, the bolts came back out again. And we know another team, we talked to from time to time. They had the exact same problem. Their bolts backed out. They tightened them back up. The bolts came out again. And we told them that our trick, we cross drill the bolts, and then we safety wire them. And that keeps those bolts from coming out. So if you have an E36 BMW and you have the drive shaft out, you might as well, if you have the CV axle out, you might as well cross drill your bolts and safety wire them now. So